Welcome to the Royal Road School of Carmelite Prayer. St. Teresa of Avila tells us that the divine path of Carmelite or silent prayer is the royal road to heaven, and that those who travel it will be given a great treasure. The link to the Praying with Teresa of Avila website has been provided below to enable you to easily find today's presentation, The Prayer of Recollection, Part 2. The website provides all the simple tools you need to develop your own practice of Carmelite or silent prayer, along with complete course materials to start your own school of prayer in your parish or community. The Prayer of Recollection by Father Emmanuel Renault, Part 2. 3. Conversations with Christ. The third part of Teresian prayer is a conversation with the Lord, an exchange that can take one of two variable forms depending on the grace of the moment or the availability of the soul. Heart-to-heart talk. The first form, which normally prolongs the exchange of looks, is the heart-to-heart talk. Today we would say a dialogue with the Lord. For not only will you desire to look at him, but you will also delight in speaking with him, not the ready-made prayers, but with those that come from the sorrow of your own heart, for he esteems them highly. To remain in his presence, maintain intimate contact with him, a moment will come when the soul breaks the silence, expresses itself by delivering without preparation the bottom of its being. The soul can grow accustomed to being inflamed with love for his sacred humanity. It can keep him ever present and speak with him, asking for its needs and complaining of its labors, being glad with him in its enjoyments, and not forgetting him because of them, trying to speak to him not through written prayers, but with words that conform to its desires and needs and our needs. We can see that it is out of the question to use stereotypical formulas to express elevated feelings, to make grand and complicated remarks. Teresa here wants to discourage certain souls from creating a persona, from trying to present to the Lord an honorable front worthy of him, or the illusion of those who think they had a good prayer time because they spent the whole time talking without stopping. Remain there in his presence with the intellect quiet, and if a person is able, he should occupy himself in looking at Christ, who is looking at him, and he should speak and petition and humble himself and delight in the Lord's presence, and remember that he is unworthy of being there. Truth, liberty, and love are the three principal qualities that Teresa insists on in this one-on-one conversation with the Lord. Truth of the soul that hides nothing of its misery, of its weaknesses, of its needs, knowing that it is known without any possible dissimulations and loved by the Lord in spite of everything. They should put themselves in the presence of Christ and without tiring the intellect, speak with and delight in him, and not wear themselves out in composing syllogisms. Rather, they should show him their needs and the reason why he doesn't have to allow us to be in his presence. The discursive reflection they can do at one time, and the other acts at another, so that the soul may not grow tired of always eating the same food. The liberty which the soul can and should use in the expression of its feelings is the parousia of which the Scriptures and the Fathers of the Church speak. It is the familiarity, the frankness, the simplicity of two friends who know one another intimately and know that they can talk to one another without beating around the bush, without talking 1,000 without taking 1,000 precautions to not wound the sensitivity of the other or pretending to have uplifting feelings. He likes us to be truthful with him if we speak plainly and clearly, so that we don't say one thing and then act differently. He always gives more than what we ask of him. See, for example, the prayer she prays for her brother Agustin de Ahumada in danger in Chile in July 1571. This prayer from the heart, so free in its tone, was habitual for her. I began to talk to the Lord in a foolish way, which I often do without knowing what I'm saying. It is love that is then speaking. My God is not at all touchy. He doesn't bother about trifling things. He adjusts himself to our way of giving. At last, we are at the heart of Teresian prayer. It is important above and beyond all else to show a love that aims to be total, unique, and alive. Teresa will repeat that in interior prayer, it is very important not to think much, but to love much. She affirms that with interior prayer, bodily strength is not necessary, but only love and a habit. To designate those who practice interior prayer, she had this beautiful formula: they are servants of love. If all imaginations are not capable of meditating, all souls are capable of loving. It is necessary here to recall what Teresa meant when she spoke of the love of God and neighbor, areas bringing into play her whole conception of Christian perfection. Briefly, to love the Lord does not only involve feelings of admiration, of recognition, of adoration, of trust, but once again and principally of the willingness to conform oneself to the will of God, whatever its costs. In her writings, like a mantra, she continually came back to the expression to please God in everything. That is why she insisted that one prove through actions the authenticity of one's love. The love of God does not consist in tears or in delight and tenderness, which for the greater part we desire and find consolation in, but it consists in serving with justice and fortitude of soul and in humility. As a sign of a good interior prayer, she wrote to the Father Gracian, the fact is that in these interior things of the Spirit, what is more acceptable and certain is what leaves the best effects. I do not mean immediately with respect to many desires. Even though these are good, they do not at times amount to all that our self-love paints them to be. What I mean by the best effects are those confirmed by works, and that the desires for the honor of God become apparent in an authentic solicitude for it, and that the intellect and memory be occupied in how best to please Him and show Him the love one has for Him. During the time of prayer, it is necessary to do everything to keep a lively contact with Christ and to maintain the relationship of love active, and so do that which best stirs you to love. She suggests that the soul behave towards God according to its choice or its temperament at the time or according to the circumstances. Speak with Him as with a father or a brother or a lord, or as with a spouse, sometimes in one way, at other times in another. In taking into consideration all the elements presented by Teresa in her explanation of the prayer of recollection, it would seem that one must recognize in this heart-to-heart with the Lord two forms, close but distinct. The first could be called a simple conversation in which the soul spontaneously exposes that which has accumulated in its heart, and that the Holy Spirit has inspired that which comes to mind in the immediate. The soul empties the overflow of the heart without an order or a plan, as we have seen. Conversation with an evangelical theme. A second form of conversation can be employed when this effusion tarnishes. A form that we can call a conversation with an evangelical theme because it calls for a simpler form of meditation. Teresa knew that the will often needs the help of the intellect so as to be enkindled. The characteristic of this conversation with a meditative basis compared to the methodical meditation is double. First of all, it is based on the fact that one chooses not a general idea, the last judgment, the void, heaven, hell, but a Bible scene. Now, returning to what I was saying about Christ bound at the pillar, it is good to reflect a while and think about the pains he suffered there, and why and who he is, and the love with which he suffered them. Then we will not be happy considering the events of the life of Christ from the outside like a theater spectacle, but will enter into the action which unfolds, taking part in it as if really living the scene in the company of the actors of the Bible. We will read and interpret the word of Christ as if they were addressed to us personally and in the present moment. Teresa's preference was the Passion of the Christ. She recognizes that we can choose other passages from the Bible, but that it is important to always come back to this episode. It is from here which has come and continues to come every good. So, representing the Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, I strove to be his companion there, if I could. I thought of the sweat and agony he had undergone in that place. I desired to wipe away the sweat he so painfully experienced, but I recall that I never dared to actually do it, since my sins appeared to me so serious. She asked her daughters to look at Christ bound to the column, persecuted by some, spit on by others, denied by his friends, abandoned by them, with no one to defend him, frozen from the cold, left so alone that you can console each other. In summary, she suggested a real attempt to act and went even as far as saying, "Take up that cross, daughters. Don't mind at all if the Jews trample upon you, if his trial can thereby be lessened." Couldn't we say that she saw herself climbing Calvary with Christ surrounded by his enemies? She told another of her simplicities as she said, after communion, she saw herself at the feet of the Lord, and she wept with the Magdalene, no more, no less than if she were seeing him with her bodily eyes in the house of the Pharisee. And even though she didn't feel devotion, faith told her that he was indeed there. The naive considerations she allowed herself were in keeping with the familiarity of which we are speaking. It is in this particular and restrained sense that she invites us into meditation. For in the prayer of recollection, meditation, or the work of the intellect, must not be set aside. There again, it is important to be careful not to prolong this meditative conversation, but one should not always weary oneself in seeking these reflections. As soon as the soul has been wakened to love, it is necessary to come back to the free and spontaneous conversation or to the simple look. They would be right if they engaged for a while in making acts of love, praising God, rejoicing in his goodness, that he is who he is, and in desiring his honor and glory. for they are great awakeners of the will. Doing this, we achieve the true goal of interior prayer, and it would be an aberration to want to return to ordinary meditation under the pretext of wanting to end a time of interior prayer in a conventional way as outlined in manuals. We alternate periods of silence with exchange according to the state of our soul. He doesn't want us to be breaking our heads trying to speak a great deal to him. We are struck by the extreme flexibility of this Teresian manner of prayer, which allows the soul the greatest liberty provided that it is active, in other words, awakened to love. She would be able to go during the same time of prayer from an attitude of a simple look to a heart-to-heart conversation in one or the other form and inversely, using at will the method of interior prayer which allowed her to stay vigilant and loving. To be able to persevere in this interior liberty necessary for love, Teresa really insisted that we do not force the soul with the whip. It is very helpful not to drag the soul along, as they say, but to lead it gently for the sake of its greater advantage. And further, it is very important for any soul that practices prayer, whether little or much, not to hold itself back and stay in one corner. Don't force it to stay a long time in one room alone. Methods of recollection. It could happen, however, that the living contact with Christ cannot be established or maintained during the time set aside for interior prayer, resulting from bad body position, dryness, or distractions. To achieve contact or to re-establish contact, Teresa suggests diverse little ploys, skill, which are only means to arrive at the goal. Indeed, when the fire in the will that was mentioned is not enkindled and God's presence is not felt, it is necessary that we seek His presence. She recommends helping yourself with a good book written in the vernacular in order to recollect one's thoughts and pray well vocally, and little by little accustom the soul with coaxing and skill not to grow discouraged. For 18 years after communion, I never dared to begin prayer without a book, for my soul was as fearful of being without it during prayer as it would have been should it have had to do battle with a lot of people. With this recourse, which was like a partner or a shield by which to sustain the blows of my many thoughts, I went about consoled. After that, she will continue to use a book that she would keep beside her. As soon as I have a book, if I like it, I become recollected, and the reading transforms into interior prayer. Reading offers a center of interest, something for my thoughts to focus on. It represents an intermediate which enhances recollection and even, for some, replaces mental prayer that cannot be achieved. In any case, for those who journey along this path, a book helps to promptly recollect oneself. I have always been fond of the words of the Gospel and found more recollection in them than in very cleverly written books. Some other suggestions she recommends would be to carry about an image or a painting of the Lord that is to your liking, not so as to carry it about on your heart and never look at it, but so as to speak often with Him. We have to return to this method when He Himself is absent, or when by means of a great dryness He wants to make us feel He is absent. It is then a wonderful comfort to see an image of one whom we have so much reason to love, and to feel sorry for the heretics denied this consolation. Now, then, let us speak again to those souls I mentioned that cannot recollect or tie their minds down in mental prayer or engage in reflection. She suggests reciting a vocal prayer like the Our Father. It is important to seek to understand each word, each sentence that they say. The mind should not impose a type of thinking of which hypothetically it is not capable. It is enough for it to follow the words of the prayer, forcing itself to grasp the meaning. The intellect is recollected much more quickly with this kind of prayer, even though it may be vocal. It is prayer that brings with it many blessings. Teresa affirms that even by this path it is possible to achieve perfect contemplation. I tell you that it is very possible that while you are reciting the Our Father or some other vocal prayer, that the Lord may raise you to perfect contemplation. She cites the example of a person in this case. There is a last objection that needs to be addressed. Teresa heard murmurings about the reality of her having had a real conversation with the Lord. The friendly dialogue that she proposes, doesn't it come down, in fact, to a monologue in which the soul does most of the talking without an answer? Teresa recognized, first of all, that the Lord comes very late and pays just as well, and all at once, what he is giving to others in the course of many years. Even though we do not hear him, he speaks well to the heart when we beseech him from the heart. Concerning beginners and all those who begin, yet they never reach the end, thinking that they are doing nothing, she remarks that it is then perhaps that their will is being strengthened and fortified, although they may not be aware of this. As for Teresa, she is certain that the Lord does not stop acting in the soul who is looking for him. Though he comes disguised, the disguise, as I have said, does not prevent him from being recognized in many ways, in conformity with the desire we have to see him. And you can desire to see him so much that he will reveal himself to you entirely. If we prepare ourselves to receive him, he never fails to give in many ways which we do not understand. Another noteworthy remark, something marvelous, worthy of careful attention, for as soon as he understands that the soul is totally his, he never ceases to commune with it in so many ways and manners, as one who is wisdom itself. In summary, the Lord's answer in the heart-to-heart of interior prayer happens certainly not through words, but by his actions in the most intimate part of the soul, or by the feeling that he gives delight to be there, to suffer for him, to believe and hope in him, in spite of the contradiction of events. There are happy feelings about your misery, about knowing yourself loved and forgiven. Sometimes there is a silence full of love, of joy at his beauty, of his mercy, of his glory, of peace, or of an interior light on him. Sometimes there is a feeling that he is there, that he is listening, but more often, or most usually, there is nothing other than a reinforced will to serve him, whatever the cost. Amen. End of Part 2 of the Prayer of Recollection by Father Emmanuel Renault.